This broadcast is the property of Codependents Anonymous. Reproduction without written permission from Codependents Anonymous is not permitted.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dakota Mayhem. I am so grateful to be here. I'm so excited to be here. And today I'm going to take you through a little bit of my story. And I'm going to do my best to focus on the 3 patterns that I have noticed changing in my 4.5 years of recovery in Codependents Anonymous. Those would be the low self-esteem patterns, those are the denial patterns, and those are the compliance patterns. I identify as bisexual. I am a Nigerian woman of African descent living on Canarsie land in New York City. And that makes my experience of these particular patterns, as they say, codependents can have patterns of behavior relative to other people, but we can also have behaviors relative to systems. And so I would like to speak a little bit today about what I noticed shifting as I'm recovering from systemic oppression. So I'm going to read a crosstalk statement. If you will kindly keep this in mind, it's from a mutual aid program, another 12-step program. We do not crosstalk in meetings. Crosstalk means interrupting, which includes using reaction buttons and video filters, referring to or commenting on what another person has said during the meeting. We do not crosstalk because Black, Indigenous people and people of color come from backgrounds where feelings and perceptions were judged wrong or defective. Each person may share feelings and perceptions without fear of judgment. We accept without comment what others say because they are entitled to their own experience. We work towards taking more responsibility in our lives rather than giving advice to others. Please abstain from using the chat for anything other than leaving your contact information or outreach. And specific to our gathering today, if anybody has any technical questions, please refer them to the host, which is Kevin M. He's labeled Kevin M as events. And at 5 o'clock, I would really love to hear from you. So I'll be inviting some folks to share. Please keep the crosstalk statement in mind. And after people are done sharing, I will take a few questions. So we'll open the chat after folks are done. All right, so thank you for bearing with the housekeeping. I will dive in. I'm gonna share some recovery patterns with you. So we're going to start here with denial patterns, and I'm going to weave it into low self-esteem patterns, and we're going to wrap things up with our compliance patterns. One of the biggest ones that I've noticed for me that has changed in recovery is that codependents often mask pain in various ways, such as anger, humor, or isolation. And I've noticed in recovery that I'm aware of my painful feelings. Let me just move y'all out of the way. I'm aware of my painful feelings and I express them appropriately. I'll read that again. Codependents often mask pain in various ways, such as anger, humor, and isolation. And in recovery, I am aware of my painful feelings. I express them appropriately. Another pattern that I've noticed that has shifted and changed for me is that codependents often do not recognize the unavailability of those people to whom they are attracted. In recovery, I'm noticing that I pursue intimate relationships only with others who want and are able to engage in healthy and loving relationships. I'll read that again. Codependents do not recognize the unavailability of those people to whom they are attracted. In recovery, I pursue intimate relationships only with others who I want and are able to engage in healthy and loving relationships. I'm going to read you one more thing. This is from Peeling the Onion. As I get set up here, I'm going to give a big plug for literature. It's been one of the life-giving tools of program for me. And here we are. Let me pop back in and share this with you. Give me 1 second. All right, so I'm going to read this as well. trust me, I'll tie these pieces together once I get my story going. So from peeling the onion, one of the low self-esteem patterns, one of the reasons that folks who would identify with the term love addiction, that's from this section of the book. I can actually tell you exactly what page that is. That is relationship addiction. That is page 8 in Peeling the Onion. Fear of being alone. In relationship addiction, we stay in the relationship no matter how unsatisfying because we cannot tolerate being alone. We are afraid of change, do not know how to let go, or how to move on with our lives unless we have another relationship lined up. If our partner ends the relationship, we are willing to do anything to get him or her back. We may threaten, beg, or use sex to manipulate. If we cannot change our partner's mind, we get into another relationship as soon as possible. We may, in desperation, even stay in dangerously abusive relationships to avoid being alone. And I'll read some of these short anecdotes for you. Anecdote 1 is, although I had a sister, I was a loner. I read lots of romance books and dreamt of falling in love and being swept away from my empty life to one filled with love and happiness. Those two worlds were synonymous to me, couldn't have one without the other. I had my first boyfriend when I was 8 years old and never was never without one from that point on. I needed connection to make me feel happy. Anecdote 2 is, when she left, I felt so abandoned. I was so afraid of being alone that I was obsessed with either getting her back or finding someone new. Anecdote 3, my marriage was hurtful. I stayed for 13 years until I had the courage to leave to be alone. The thought of anecdote number 4 and final, the thought that I might never find that special person makes my blood run cold. And I'm going to pause the sharing there and segue into my story here. So you'll notice that I'm smiling and I'm chuckling because I recognize all of myself in each of those anecdotes. And I really say that peeling the onion is one of the price of admissions in the literature for this program. I really hope that you get a chance to connect with that literature. I am the youngest of 4. My parents are Nigerian. And I grew up in Canada in a small town in the prairies. And my parents my dad was, my father had passed away coming up on 4 years. And his anniversary was one of the catalysts that brought me to program. So my parents were survivors of a civil war, the Biafran Civil War that divided North and Southern Nigeria. My memory of asking my mother about her relationship to her father, and I remember the stories that she shared with me were very short. They seemed to be painful in nature. She was very clear that he was good at math, and it was important for her to be educated and good at math. I also get a sense that she felt unseen or not seen in the full scope of her humanity by her father. And from my own father, I have profound gaps in who my aunts and my uncles were. I know that my father was estranged from his brother, so my paternal uncle, who is still alive today. And that individual has contacted me. I've endeavored to connect with them. It's very challenging for various reasons to stay in contact with this uncle in particular. And I remember raising recently, probably about a year ago, to my mother, a desire of mine own to reconnect with my family in Nigeria. And the narrative from both sides, my mom and my dad, has been, why would you want to know those people? Why would you want to know those people? You're not safe. And so as an adult, it's been a pain point for me to understand how to keep myself safe and also live out my desire to reconnect with my relatives who are still living in Nigeria. So the gaps in the information that I don't have was endemic to my story and how I developed as an entertainer. I work as a performance artist. And I saw my parents, and through their anecdote to me, them traveling out of Nigeria against many odds to create a safe home life for their children. My oldest sister was born on the road. My father worked as an attaché to the Nigerian ambassador to the United States. They traveled all through the Horn of Africa. And then in the time where my oldest sister and my middle sister were born, and then when they moved to Washington, D.C., the way my father told the story was he wanted to escape, so he had to develop other skills. And my father had a little bit of a journalistic acumen, but he just had this sense of, I'm going to hit the ground running and teach myself whatever I need to do in order to survive. And at that time, when they had moved to Washington, D.C., my brother was born. My brother and myself are 9 years apart. I'm 41. And so I would remember asking my father why they didn't stay in Washington, D.C. And I remember, again, the theme of safety, him saying that I can't raise a son here. I can't raise a son here. And as the story from my parents landed on me, I still had this experience, this felt sense of how much of your story is actually true, how much of their reality was urgent. I didn't know at the time, the earlier questions when I asked my father how he migrated our whole family from Nigeria to the States initially. The time I had really started mining these questions, I was around 17, 18. And, between that time, 17, 18 and 38, my father passed away. The story had changed just a little bit. There were some nuances that changed, and the willingness that my father had to tell a story waxed and waned over the course of the years. And certainly as his memory went just a little bit, he was sharp right to the end, but just as his memory went a little bit, on certain days I'd get more of the story, other days I would get less. And so the question around how safe they felt in Washington, D.C., for me, I never got explicit descriptions of grievances or wrongs, but I know that they absolutely experienced. I think now as an adult, I can surmise that some of the things that happened to them were too painful to speak on. My sisters were of age. My sisters were teenagers. My oldest sister was probably in her early 20s at that time, before they migrated from Washington, D.C. to Canada. And I do remember some of the memories that she had shared. They had often felt that they weren't the right kind of African enough to develop relationships, or they also experienced bullying. And I think for me, I can speak on my experience, which is what the program wants us to do, keep the focus on ourselves. This is my third culture. Living in New York right now is in addition to me having grown up in Winnipeg, learned and having spoken Yoruba, which was our Nigerian mother tongue, having that spoken to me in the household, going to school, having to learn and study in French and English, which is the language of colonial structure in which I was raised, i.e. in which my parents were also escaping. And then having me chosen to transport myself to generate the best livelihood that I could for myself as a performer. This is my third culture. I wasn't raised and I hadn't grown up steeped in African-American vernacular. So I'm tying all these threads together to say that through action, I saw my parents model that the world is your home. I've always believed and felt in my flesh that the world is my home, in spite of the very violent things that have happened that I know that my parents have survived, that I have also experienced on my own body as I traveled the world. Just shifting to the sense of codependence, recovering from not recognizing the unavailability of people to whom we are attracted. So I'm going to move the story forward here. leaving my home around the first time I left home permanently to move as an adult, I was 19 years old. I lived in Switzerland. I worked as a nanny, and it was a really great experience. There was more good than there was pejorative. But I look back on myself at that time, and I realized how much of myself I would have to deny existed, not talk about, and transmute in order to fit into everyday society. I remember the sense of shame that I had around, and perfectionism that I had around not being able to speak French as well as I should have been able to speak French. The children that I cared for were white children, delightful family. I had a great experience, but I remember one day, one of the children had said to me in front of her friends, Dakota, t'en as pas de la chance d'être noir. And I knew what the words meant, but I just remember, I'll translate for you in a second. I remember the crumbling sense of a lack of power and awareness around this child recognizes something about me, and what she's recognizing or naming feels so true when I think about her location and access to money, power, and ease at which her life is going to continue to unfold in a way that mine did not. So what that translation means is, Dakota, you're not lucky to be Black. And as a 19-year-old, that landed really, really hard, harder than I thought. And so when I say that I'm in program, I say that I'm in program to recover my relationship to God, Goddess. I actually identify the higher power of my understanding is Goddess, source, universal source, and ancestors. And for a very long time, I have been so angry at God for making me Black, making me bisexual, making me a woman, making me, in my perception, the lowest tier on the totem pole. And I think I started to come of age of that as my entrance, as I started entering systems and supply chains of that is germane to becoming a performance artist on a public scale. And so when I speak about these patterns in recovery, I'm really giving a plug for the tools that have allowed me to engage and heal myself in a way that doesn't gaslight myself or minimize the very lived and real experiences and the nuances of racialized violence, microaggressions. And so I'm going to move forward to the self-esteem patterns and then tell you a little bit more of my story. I'm just going to pull those up so we can refresh here and remind ourselves what those are. All right, so low self-esteem patterns. I'm going to focus on a few. You can see all of them here. I'll share with you the ones that I will focus on today. Codependents often value others' approval of their thinking, feelings, and behavior over their own. I value the opinions of those I trust in recovery. I value the opinions of those I trust without needing to gain their approval. I have confidence in myself. I'll read that again. In recovery, I value the opinions of those I trust without needing to gain their approval. I have confidence in myself. So moving from Switzerland, right? I'm 19 years old. I get into the university program of my dreams. I am studying to become an actor, realizing at the time that I am one of 3 individuals of color and 2 Black and 1 Chinese. We're all still great friends. And I didn't realize that I was trying to get validation from a system that is invested in rendering me invisible. So in my family, there were many positive things happen, but one of the narratives, I think, for better or for worse, was that you need to do whatever you can to do to have a fantastic quality of life. So what that meant in my family as women, you need to find a good husband, and altogether, I wasn't going to be a valid or, let's say, educated individual if I didn't go to university. So I chose to go to university and get a degree that I could stand to get, because I just wasn't, I didn't honor at the time, because I didn't have the language or the ability to do so. I didn't honor that I didn't want to be in an educational institution in any capacity. But if I was going for art, it would be perfect. So I thought. And so the other piece that was imparted to myself and my siblings in my family of origin was get married, get a good job, and the status is that identify you being a worthwhile human being is if you're making more than 6 figures. So I was always steered on that track in my family. What comes with that is a culture of what the outside of what you present, how you look, what people think of you, that is more important than what the inside feels. So I got into this cycle of denying my feelings if it was always in service of a narrative that people believed that Dakota's doing well, she's got a great job, or she's on a trajectory to become a celebrity, or she's making X, Y, Z dollars in the bank account. These kinds of things were the motivating factors, but I didn't know that I was making choices motivated by these individual factors until I came to program. So university was fine. There were various things that have happened, too many to list. I'm trying to keep this focus on myself. One of the most egregious things that I feel happened was, I remember a professor saying to me that it's going to be really hard for you. I would ask why any harder than anybody else? Because acting is a very challenging profession. It's going to be very hard for you because there aren't many Black women. They're just not there. I would have that sentiment repeated to me over a decade from managers, agents, and casting directors, all of them not Black. And that chips away at a person's self-esteem over time. To see yourself rendered invisible, or even to hear that people you trust, that's why I'm bringing up teachers, are invested in perpetuating a system that doesn't want to see or hear my story, is something that I realize now had done me much more harm. And I'm grateful for program because I now have the understanding of what it is to recover specifically from this quality as a codependent. So it's not that the complex of the result of me being rendered invisible didn't take place at any one person saying any one particular comment. It was that there are so many people had themselves been conditioned to accept that I shouldn't exist and be present. And they are also very comfortable that I was not in their space. For me, in my experience, you get accustomed to hearing so often that you are being difficult for speaking up, or being difficult for having accommodations made for you. Accommodations that are the bar being very, very low, that one should be paid what the market rate is for their counterparts, or their white counterparts. These things start to accumulate. And I think for me, by the time I had made it to program, as I said 4.5 years ago, I was so emotionally beat down that the net result on my body was fatigue. So let me move to, I'm going to share my screen with you again. Moving to the compliance patterns, I want to share with you a little bit more of my story, and then I'm going to open the floor for shares to see if anybody has, been moved and they would like to hear a little bit. They would like to share a little bit more based on what they've heard. Okay, so I'm moving to a compliance pattern here. I'm going to share my screen with y'all. Okay, so there's a few. Buckle in. I'm going to buckle in and get a little sip of tea here. and hopefully you'll like this part. So there are a few here that I resonate with. I'm going to read the pre-recovery pattern and then move to the recovery pattern. Codependents often are extremely loyal, remaining in harmful situations too long. I touched on that a little bit earlier. Codependents are hypervigilant regarding the feelings of others and take on those feelings. In recovery, I can separate my feelings from the feelings of others. I allow myself to experience my feelings and others to be responsible for their feelings. I'm going to read that one again. Codependents pre-recovery are hyper-vigilant regarding the feelings of others and take on those feelings. In recovery, I can separate my feelings from the feelings of others. I allow myself to experience my feelings and others to be responsible for their feelings. Okay, and this one, well, I'm going to take us home here. I'm going to refer to Peel the Onion to go a little deeper into this one. Codependents accept sexual attention when they want love. In recovery, my sexuality is grounded in genuine intimacy and connection. When I need to feel love, I express my heart's desires. And I'm going to dip real quick into Peeling the Onion to read something that really resonates with me about sex. Codependents accept sex when they want love. So a few anecdotes in the literature. All I really want is affection, but he insists on sex. Another anecdote, I would take whatever crumbs of affection I could get and be happy for days. Another anecdote, I use sex to gain approval, acceptance, and love. I thought if he had sex with me, he would love me and I would be happy. And in the literature, it also says, in recovery, we respect ourselves. We set our own boundaries in our sexual relations. We learn to discern the difference between sex and love. I really like the way it's framed in Peeling the Onion, because I think that's what I'm coming to say here at my point in recovery. 4.5 years in, I'm just about to do step 2. I feel like I'm at a place where if my personal thesis is that I'm here to heal my relationship with God as source and ancestors, I'm not going to pretend that I'm not angry. And there's still things there's a lot of business between me and God that's not settled. So I'm very sensitive to the power of language. I don't want to ingest stories that are not true. And I think where that antidote lies is understanding the spiritual discernment. And it goes really back to it goes back to the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's a spiritual discernment. So, great segue. Picture me, half my age, coming out of university. I got very success, and I got paid very well as an actor really soon out of university, counter to what I was told. So there was a dissonance already at play. I felt on top of the world when I was working. And then when I was in between jobs, in between gigs, I would crash so hard that I would stuff this God-sized hole with whoever was present and whatever was present. And as I had said, the net result between these highs and lows was a profound level of fatigue that I didn't know what the source was. And I didn't really know how to stop it. So I kept going around and around, and somehow rightly or wrongly, whatever the messaging was, I came to believe that if I had a white man, my life would be so much easier. And I used to joke with my ex that I'm going to make him my housebound slave because I just didn't want to be alive anymore at a certain point. I felt so tired and I couldn't see myself making it, past a certain age. So when I fell in love with my soon-to-be ex, I'm getting divorced currently. I was married for 12 years, which is why I had read the story from Till the Onion. That really resonated with me. I was coming into that marriage, I didn't know it at the time, but I now know it, with such a fear of being alone and such a sense of fatigue that the idea of, I was steeped in a sense, part of my experience was steeped in a sense of lack and scarcity. I didn't believe that there was a way of life that wasn't completely exhaustive. And I didn't believe, because I had so much of it testify to me, that my chosen livelihood, the way that I wanted to fully express myself as an artist or as an actor, I didn't see women or individuals, bisexual individuals, queer individuals, living out my experience on TV. A little bit of a flashback, so much of, as I had said, in my household, what was on the outside was so much more important than what was going on emotionally. I didn't realize that when I was a child, the fantasy part of my brain was being nurtured, because how we would commune as a family was in front of the television set. We would, in hindsight, there is a lot of enmeshment between myself and my siblings and myself and my parents. We would feel each other's emotions. And, when my oldest sister, she had, we won't have time to get into that story, but she had left the family unit, it was it wasn't just the grief of loss of the relationship personally. It was that I had to feel my mom's rage and anger, and that, there is such a narrative around how we are all supposed to feel about my sister. And what I'm so grateful for in the program is I'm able to see that, holy shit, I'm allowed boundaries in between myself and the people that I love. And I'm only now getting the language to pull apart what it is to experience things, experience emotions in a way that isn't tangled and conflated, which is why I really love the passage around sex and sexuality. I didn't know in my marriage that I was allowed to have sexual feelings and not be wrong or bad, sexual feelings for other people outside of my marriage. Didn't mean I need to act on them, but just the experience of them. I was allowed, and I can have a safe place to talk about them. And that's truly been the gift of meeting specifically. I also just want to say, because we're getting at 5, and I wanted to see if anybody wanted to share on anything that they had heard. But I do want to say, for me, program is not a substitute for therapy. I think I came to program as a result of therapy, but I'm still working with my therapist that I so am grateful for. She is such a blessing to me. And so what I'm naming for myself as recovery are signposts, touchstones, or cornerstones, all these metaphors, but there's nothing that stands alone as an island unto itself. It's literature, it's coming to meetings, it's finding a sponsor, it is engaging in a web of recovery individuals who, for me, can be what I call an emotionally sober reference. And all of these things work together to allow me to take the best possible care of myself in surviving a system that's invested in annihilating and rendering me invisible. And so I think it's truly a radical act of self-care to engage in recovery and accept exactly where you are in your own unique recovery process. So I am going to open the floor. If anybody would like to share, I can be your personal timekeeper. And additionally, if you have questions for me specifically, please type them in the chat. And at 5:20, I will start taking some of those questions. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dakota.
It's beautiful, beautiful.
Thanks,
Thank
Dakota.
you. Thank you, Dakota. It's wonderful.
You're welcome. Yeah, if anybody would like to share, please raise your hand and then I can see you. And then you can have
name's
the floor.
Brenda. I'm codependent. And
okay. Hi,
yeah.
Brenda.
Hi. I love
Let me just pause you here. I'm going to set the timer for 3 minutes so that you can have the floor, and then I'll give you a 1 minute, okay? All right, perfect. Here you go. You're good.
Okay. I've been going over the patterns, and like the control pattern with my families. I've learned that one was real easy because I realized that I thought I was a know-it-all and I could run their lives, and they didn't know how to run their lives. And that one, that was real easy. I'm like, oh shit, they are capable human beings, so I can step back, because it was just a habit, and everything. So I stopped that. But things like compliance, low self-esteem, and avoidance are at the forefront for me on how to go out in the world and interact with other human beings without that stuff coming up. And so I guess my question is, I'm only on the third step. So do I just keep going to meetings, do my step work, talk in meetings? Do you have any advice on how to strengthen that little girl inside, to not be afraid, to not be afraid to speak up for herself? Because I've been so used to being shut down. Like when I say something, I'm told, no, that's not really happening, or that didn't happen, but it did, and all that stuff. And so today as an adult, I still kind of cringe or hide. I want to be able to speak up for myself. Yes, that's it. I want to speak up for myself and be seen also. Thank you.
You are heard, Brenda. Thank you for sharing. I'm just going to go across the gallery and call on folks that I see. Nanette. So I will set the timer for 3 and then give you 1 minute warning. So share whatever is on your heart and mind. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Now, is your name Dakota? What's your name?
Yes, I'm Dakota.
Hi, Dakota. I really appreciate your sharing. It was good. And I never heard of the book, Peel the Onion. Is that a CoDA book? It is. Okay. I'll have to look for that. I've been trying to peel the onion for a while, really, but I don't feel like I've gotten a lot of success. Particularly with my child, with my son. We're very codependent. But anyway, I lost one child at 23 from a drug overdose, and I've got one child left, which is a son, and he has a husband. So I've got a son and a son-in-law, which I'm very, very grateful for. But I'm very codependent to my son, and actually to both of them. But I hope to get working the steps. After today, I realized I'm going to try some of the Zoom meetings. But I could really identify with retracting people who were unavailable in my life. I've done that with men and with women. And I found people who abused me, met women too, were abusive. So now I'm 70, almost 72. It's time to change that. So I hope with my CoDA recovery, I haven't got a lot of it, but I will be able to change that and allow myself to be friends with people who will treat me with respect, which is what I do with others. I wasn't treated with respect in my marriages, either one of them. And the boyfriends I've picked up along the way between the 2 marriages were disrespectful also. And I've lost trust in my ability to form friendships because of the kind of people I attract. And that's because of my codependency. I grew up with 2 alcoholics, and one was violent and the other one was always falling down, breaking bones and going to the hospital and aspirating on her own vomit. And, you name that. So that's how I grew up. So I just never really developed any kind of healthy relationships. And I didn't feel good enough about myself to even try that. I feel less than. And I know intellectually that I'm just as equal as anybody else. Intellectually, but to feel it is different. And I had to ask, I've never asked for help because I'm not worthy enough. So it came down to me having to ask for help recently, today actually, last night and today. And it was very hard, very hard. And I want to cry just talking about it. But I missed part of this this conference because I couldn't get here. I had to go get my second vaccine shot today. So I'm glad I finally got the 2 vaccines. Yay, is right. And
Gentle time.
I'm done. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll mute.
Thank you for sharing. Lisa from London, UK, I see you. Please unmute and share. I will time you for 3 and I'll give you a 1-minute warning.
Thank you. Thanks, Dakota. Hi, I'm Lisa, recovering in this fellowship. Yeah, it was really wonderful to hear you. Gosh, there's so much identification. I'm British Ghanaian, so the West African theme, I can really get that whole thing of, yeah, you know, what your worth is really sort of determined by what you show, as in terms of academia and the job, the salary, the good husband, all of this kind of thing. And it has definitely left its mark on me. Yeah, obviously you talked about the system and, like, I guess I would sort of term it the racial codependency that I have lived with and still continue to live with, I suppose, and how much I'm trying to integrate recovery from that into my CoDA recovery as a whole. And it's hard. It's really hard to let go of. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but like, yeah, it's so ingrained, and it's really surrendering to this truth which you mentioned around the system is there to keep me quiet and to keep me invisible, and how when I'm in this really strong compliance pattern of trying to fit in, which is what I've done my whole life, trying to fit into white England, basically, it's like, you know, I actually can't win, so I never really truly will. You know, it's like I'm trying to live up to this image, this standard, which, you know, it's so futile, but it's so deeply rooted that it's almost hard to imagine my life completely without that, you know, without that sort of pull and that mindset. Yeah, so it's 1 minute, thank you. Yeah, I got a lot of hope from your share. I really did. It was really nice to hear someone express these experiences in a CoDA forum. Like, I just don't hear this in the meetings over here, and I don't really share about it in the meetings over here. So I just don't feel it's appropriate. Maybe that's the wrong word, or I just don't feel like I would, or I don't know. I just don't. So it's really cool to hear you and to hear your progress. I'm also about 4.5 years in, and I'm just doing my step 7 now. Yeah, but I'm in for the long haul. It's a journey, and yeah, thank you for listening. Thanks everyone for being here.
Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Lauren, I see you. I see your hands raised. I sent you an unmute request. Please, if you are open to sharing, I'll time you for 3 minutes and I'll give you a 1-minute warning.
Thank you. I'm Lauren, codependent in New York. I'm grateful for what I heard in the share as well as in the room. I can relate to expectations on family. I came from a high achieving family of both American and West Indian heritage. So I understand that. I was not really thinking of like the element of race and how that works into codependence. I was always in a family that said rise above, and that you are the star no matter how you go into the room, but also understand that you represent the best of all the ancestors have. And I think that kind of helped me going in. And it still helps me to this day, because growing up in New York, I always had to deal with the fact that being more American than anything else, I was considered the lucky one because I didn't have to deal with wars and all these other things. But at the same time, my heritage trails off at a certain era. And I've always kind of admired other cultures with a huge legacy. They can trace people back thousands of years, and mine abruptly ends or has so much tragedy and horror. And, you know, CoDA helped me get out of a lot of caretaking because everybody did so much for me. It was expected that I gave my time freely. And now I'm just in a kind of compliance thing because it was like so desperate for anybody that accepted me. You know, I stayed in jobs too long. I stayed in friendships too long. And the isolation of the pandemic has sort of, just like the onion, peeled away certain, I guess, surface people. And like now I'm trying to rebuild, and I'm really looking into the compliance and the low self-esteem as I go out and try to bring in new people, because I realize I come from a family that picks bad. They just really, really pick bad. And I don't want to keep this family's legacy, thank you, 1 minute, of going. Like, I want to make better decisions. I want to avoid the isolation, but at the same time, I just don't want to get stuck in this groupie mode. Like, love me, pick me, because that's where I feel a lot of times. And, you know, whether it's in work situations, I've kind of aligned myself in a contractor role just because I could not keep up with the unrealistic expectations of corporate America and what it, no matter how smart I was, no matter how educated, I was only left in certain roles, denied promotions, and I had to fight so hard. It got too exhausting, you know, but at the same time, it's like, I want all of the cash and prizes that everybody else gets. And I just know that my journey looks different. And I'm okay with that. And through the grace of this program, I've met so many great people who, you know, we're all soldiers along the journey. And I get more hope and uplifting from that every day. So thanks for letting me share.
Yes, thank you for sharing. Okay, I'll take one more share. And then after that, there are 2 questions in the chat that I will take some time to answer. And that'll probably be time for wrapping up. So, Mish, would you please unmute and share?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Did I say your name correctly?
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Did I say your name correctly?
Yes, it's Mish, correct.
Oh,
thank you.
fantastic.
Thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful. I think I got so much out of it. I'm still trying to digest it and connect all the dots. I'm sure I'll do that tonight. I just wanted to know, in your experience with creating boundaries with your family, how that was acceptable or not, unacceptable, or tensions arose. And the other thing is, having been in a long-term relationship that is soon to no longer be the case, I found it to be so guilt-ridden for myself to have shared with this person who I thought I was going to share my life with and have a family and children, that I was a codependent. And it has been used against me so often in many verbal altercations. And I live with so much regret that I believe I will never, ever let that out of the closet. Because even though it is part of myself, I think it's only hindered any progress that I could have made, because it has been brought up time and time again. And this person has taken the time to do research and just take any negative aspect, or, in any way, whatever it means to be a codependent. And there's so many different layers to it. And anything that would benefit and be manipulated in a negative way was brought to light in the last 5 years. So how to move forward with that regret and learn to build myself back up, and also build the boundaries with my family without having so much friction. I would appreciate any insight that you can provide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, everyone who had shared. I really, really appreciated hearing your personal experiences. It always gives me hope to know personally that I'm in the trenches with fellow humans who are actively trying to heal themselves. I'm going to take the questions. There's about 4, and I'm going to go backwards. And I think I'll probably cover some of the thoughts that were raised. I'm also very mindful about crosstalk because I think for me, one of the tenets that has helped me establish and maintain boundaries is simply the crosstalk statement. And, I've been able to take that principle out into my life, and it's helped me not put my hands on people. So I'm joking, but that's the real. All right, so one of the questions, I'm gonna paraphrase to kind of shield anonymity. What I was asked, how did I find the boundary regarding my culture? I hope I am interpreting that correctly. What was my experience finding the correct boundaries being raised in a different culture? And also, the last person just asked how to maintain boundaries within your family group. So, I wasn't great at it. Before counseling, before programs, so about 5 years ago, my answer was to pull a geographic, which is an avoidance tool move. It would be, if things weren't working, I'd blow relationships up, or they would just be, dramatic explosions, and I would literally move across the country or move to a different country. And one of the biggest teachers, speaking to family, has been the dissolve or the dissolution of my marriage. It's, but for the grace of God, the day that, I discovered that my ex was having an affair, and the day that I discovered it, I was able to get on the phone with my counselor, and, I was already going to meetings, but it's because I had been engaging in tools that I didn't end up in a physical altercation that could, in my scenario, in the likelihood of my reality, land me in jail. And I'm so grateful for that. That was definitely my goddess, my ancestors doing for me, reaching out to my recovery network, doing for me what I couldn't have done for myself. So for me, I have found going to meetings, reading, asking for people, asking for their numbers, or responding to people if you feel it's appropriate for yourself, giving out your appropriate contact phone number. I still feel it's appropriate for me. I give out my email. I prefer to be contacted for program purposes through my email, not my actual phone number. That's what feels right, good, and true for me, so that I can sit down and identify what amount of attention I can devote to any one relationship. And also, part of recovery has involved me identifying what my energy stores are and not denying that I do not have energy available for other people on any given day. And also, basically not lying to myself about what I'm feeling and experiencing. And that sounds like a really big meta concept, but what I love about the acronym denial, do not even know that I am lying to myself. I picked that up at a meeting, and it stuck for me because I've heard it said that whatever, you come to a meeting, you hear exactly what spirit wanted you to hear. For me, that has always been true. And it's that I realized, as I have hopefully laid out for you clearly, that there were several factors in my family of origin that set me up to gain comfort in denial patterns, because I had not been able to tolerate the sensations of fear and the sensations of loneliness. So I stayed in a marriage when it was well past time for me to leave. I'm grateful for my job now, but there are signs that it is also time to move. And I'm trying, progress, not perfection. I'm trying to get better at listening to myself, listening to my truth. So I think I'm going to move on to the next question because it might be a good segue. What do I do on a day-to-day basis to maintain recovery? I go to a meeting every day, pretty much every day. Well, let me say something about that. I have found in the last 6 months particularly with what I see as some of the gift of the pandemic, and is that I've had to decrease the amount of meetings that I go to and really zero in on a home group. That's worked for me so that I'm not using program as a higher power in and of itself. I'm trying to take some of the tenets, the tools, and the insights that I've gained and let the rubber really meet the road. So I do, one of the things I'm struggling with, I can say, is I'm currently writing a script for television, and it's really hard. That I notice that it's easier for me to jump on a meeting than it is to actually sit down and write and add and speak to myself and start telling myself the truth about whether or not I want to be writing. Am I writing in the right way? So I'm trying to answer this question, not to be indirect, but part of my recovery process is to make sure that recovery actually fits into the life that I'm trying to be living. Every day I pray, and ideally every day I do some form of meditation. And I'm very grateful. It comes with time, but it took me 5 years to find a sponsor, and that was my journey. Other folks will have a different journey because we're all going to have different states of growth and change as we heal, because this program is about healing your relationship, for me, with higher power, but also learning how to be in right relation to other people, learning how to tolerate discomfort within the context of a relationship. And also, not, to quote my wonderful counselor, I'm trying to use these tools so that I'm not constantly living in a trauma reenactment. And I think that's how I interpret the denial, any of the actual characteristics. They are symptoms of a trauma reenactment. And when you start to move into recovery, the things I'm recognizing myself is that I'm not living so much of my day-to-day in reptilian brain. So I was asked, have I been shared about being codependent with a family or partner? If so, how can one take a risk and not live with regrets later? Ooh, y'all have a lot of questions. Thank you for your questions. I think the short answer to that one for me is, doing whatever one does. Speaking about myself, I'm learning how to develop a tolerance for fear in a way that is balanced and life-giving. I'm not trying to ignore. Here's a good example. I'm taking a trip with a friend. My friend wants to travel in a way that she deems is right and true and good for her. I am allowed the space that I need to travel that is comfortable, right, good for me. So together we're trying to negotiate that space. This is a fantastic example. My friend is a couple shades lighter than me. I have 3 COVID tests and I don't have a vaccine. I don't know what my friend's status is, but I did know that I woke up one day and I had a profound sense of terror when I realized we are going to be going through customs at some point. Historically, I have traveled with 2 friends who were not Black. And in the history of my experience, I was pulled aside at the gate, stripped, in privacy, but strip searched, where my 2 friends was not. So that's for me, a lived world violation of my body that I had experienced in context to a relationship, given the theme of what I wanted to share with you guys today. That event that happened in the past is still clearly alive in my psyche somehow. It had caused a sense of terror within me. That, I lost sleep over it. So in recovery, I am grateful to have a space with my friend that I can name what's going on for me. And I also am in a place of acceptance that I can't control the future. And I also most certainly can't control my friend's body. I have made requests that, she does, get the COVID test. Neither of us are actually in a category where the vaccine's available to us. But even the simple ask of having her get a COVID test, I have to I have to accept that I am allowed to ask and I cannot control the response. And it's a balance between the sense of, first step, which is admitting that you're powerless over people, places, and things, and then also surrendering, i.e. step two, coming to believe in a power greater than ourselves that's actually going to take care and resolve the situation. And I will say, with the help of the program, there has been so much more in my life journey that I can point toward that a benevolent or well, I will say part of my journey in recovery has been to reframe and let Source teach me how Source speaks to me in terms that I understand in my own life. I can't predict that, and that's completely unlanguageable. And I'm coming to have a greater trust in that. So I hope that was a direct answer, but when it comes to my family, it's similar. Each of my family members have their own higher power. And, there's two people in both of the relationships. I have what I would say would be top and bottom line, right? For me, a top line with my mother is to really be clear about what my level of tolerance for what I will and will not tolerate in our relationship. And I've noticed over time, I've been able to educate her about my tolerances. And, so if she wants to ask questions about things that I feel I don't want to share with her, a simple no is fine. And she actually called me out on it the other day. I hadn't, my mom blew off a Zoom call that her and I were supposed to have. And it hurt. And I caught myself reaching out to my brother and sister to see what was going on with my mom, survivor of enmeshment. But instead, I started to sit, and then whatever was going on in me emotionally, it took a couple of days, it shifted and changed, but I reached back out to my mom after she was okay. And I noticed that whatever was, and her response wasn't anything great. She didn't really have an excuse for blowing off the Zoom call. But what that situation pointed out to me is I can't control how she is going to respect my boundary, i.e. in this case, my boundary of time. And I've already historically seen and observed that my mom is somebody who doesn't, she's not great at apologies. She's not going to give me the emotional payoff or the amends that I would like to hear from her. And that's in the wheelhouse of acceptance. And that's taken a great deal of time to work at. And I think the short answer to the question is you have to, each one of us, it's incumbent upon us to develop top and bottom lines, things that we will tolerate within ourselves. So for me, an example of a top line is I need to move my body every day. And a bottom line would be if someone flakes on an appointment that they have for me, I'm not going to repeat myself. I'm not going to reach out to that person to reschedule. I'm going to turn it over to my goddess source and my ancestors to let them prove to me whether or not this relationship is something that I need to, that requires me to take any more action steps. But for me, a bottom line is I don't chase people anymore. And as I've seen that bottom line take root within my spirit, it's been hard. It's been hard. Sometimes there is a gap between enforcing that bottom line. If someone has stepped on a boundary and I usually take a couple days to sit with myself, to pray and meditate to see what level of exposure I want to that individual. And if I deem that I want to diminish contact or change and limit the access that I have to that person, I have done that. And usually there's a day or two of withdrawal because I'm still the same human in some ways that I was pre-programmed. I still am wired at the acceptance piece. I'm understanding that I'm wired to intermittent rewards and instant gratification. And so if that means accepting somebody in my life who doesn't respect my communication boundary, it might in the short run give me the intimate reward to be in contact with them. But I now know from recovery over the long view that I'm causing myself harm by not upholding a bottom line for myself. So I know that was a long answer, but I hope it touched on a few of those questions, because I think some of these questions, being codependent with another loved one and boundaries with family members, I think I hit the key points there. Yeah, interested in acting. Someone's interested in acting. One of the things that concerns this individual is the idea of boundaries. How have I navigated boundaries in acting? Saying no. That's a really great question for me. And I'm going to keep going until this room is shut down. So I'll keep asking questions. I will say, before I address this question, if folks need to take off or leave, no hard feelings, keep coming and going. I'll just keep answering these questions. So, excuse me, speaking to acting, that's been a great question. And I think it really, so the question again, just so folks understand what I'm speaking to. The one thing that concerns this person is the idea of boundaries. How have I navigated boundaries in the acting world, given saying no, can saying no cost you a gig? Absolutely. I haven't, so the way my career looked immediately after college, so about 20 years ago, and the way it looks today, dramatically different. I had earlier in the talk said that I had been wired to societal wiring in my family's origin wiring. That's what I mean. I had been wired to value that the outside is more important than what's going on the inside. And as a side note, I think all of us living in capitalism, corporatism, we're conditioned this way. This is in the water, we're all drinking it, which is why being anti-violence, all of the things, it benefits all of us, because until all of us are free, none of us are free. So here's a great anecdote. I had an experience where if you would have looked at my headshot, for example, I could look at myself as a young, early 20 thing. And I remember when I had said that I was attracted to my ex because I had believed that if I had a white man as a partner, that my life would be easier. And about a year and a half before I got married, I could look at that headshot and I could think, I would believe if I sounded white, or if I looked like a white version of myself, or if I looked palatable to the people who are in positions of power to give me a job, most of them at the time, all white, if I looked palatable to them, sounded educated enough to them, I would survive this industry and I could be fine. So I did all these gymnastics through contorting my identity in order to have some kind of gainful career as an actor. And it worked for a time, and it worked for a time. There was a time I wasn't working what we would say in the industry on offer. I wasn't having jobs offered to me, but I was getting great auditions, and I had the agent of my dream. I think what became clear to me was when it stopped, when I stopped getting attention, when I stopped getting auditions, when I stopped getting invited for a seat at the table. I had moved to Vancouver, and I had a new agent, and my career had dried up. And so I went to sit down, and Spirit started to have me question. I was married or getting married to my ex at the time. So I started to feel within myself, are these external trappings? Who am I? Am I even being true to myself? I was never taking any roles that alluded to being gay or queer or bisexual. So on that front, I absolutely was not telling myself the truth about myself. So my marketing wasn't very clear. And I think subsequently my agent didn't even know how to sell me. And so there was a project that came in. It was actually one of the earlier versions of Orange is the New Black, because they were doing some shooting in Vancouver. And it seems like everyone that I knew who was of African descent had been called into audition, but not myself. So I went to have a discussion with my agent. And from my perspective, I was sitting in front of this man asking him, is it me? What is wrong with me? And that for me, that conversation and how I showed up in that conversation was one of the worst things that I could, one of my rock bottoms. And I remember him, I showed him 2 headshots, one with my hair the way it is now and one with my hair with extensions. And he had said, he had looked at both headshots, and the one that had long extensions, the one in my eyes looked like a whiter version of myself. He said, this person looks a little bit more hygienic. And I will never forget those words. And I'm saying all this to say, I was trying to get, looking at my part in this, I was trying to get love, validation, and recognition from an individual, but also from an industry that wasn't invested in my story, that wasn't invested in knowing the totality of who I am. And I was so insane that I couldn't even look at either of those pictures and see myself. So in terms of acting, I think